So, we are starting the Holocaust today. I just want a little disclaimer as far as making sure that you understand that this is a very serious topic. So, while we're talking about this and anything really, of a serious nature, I want to make sure that you understand that any jokes or insensitive topics or anything that, is an insensitive comment um, is not tolerated in my classroom. I just want to make sure that this is not a time for jokes. While I try to make my class, a lighthearted place as much as possible, some things that we need to teach need to be, not joked about. So that's just a little disclaimer from me. But we are going to learn about the Holocaust, and I do talk about the rise and fall of Hitler and the Nazi Party because it is something that I learned about in college, and I find it very interesting. And I think it's interesting to know how Nazi Germany came to be. So, not just the Holocaust, but the whole rise of Hitler as a leader and then his downfall is what we're going to be talking about. So, our learning target is just identifying the events that led to the mass persecution of Jews and other minority groups in Europe. So, we're first going to look at origins of anti Semitism to really get into why Jews were the target of mass persecution. So, anti Semitism is just prejudice against Jewish people. So, anti is against, Semitism is just, Jews, so against Jewish people. So, anti Semitism or the, prejudice against Jewish people increased after the death of Jesus, which is the Bible story about what Christians believe as their Savior that are going to get them to heaven, that died for their sins. Why it increased again after he died was Christians held the Jews accountable for his death and crucifixion. While I guess it is the Romans who actually killed him, but they blamed the Jews for the ones who were kind of egging them on to do it. But that's where it really starts to be a prejudice against Jewish people. Why Jews and Christians are kind of, I wouldn't say at odds, but as far as religious beliefs, they're opposite. So Jews, how I always remember it, they kind of they just study the Old Testament or before Jesus. So they do not believe that Jesus was, the Savior or the second coming of Christ. Some do believe that he existed, and some believe that he didn't exist. The people that do believe he exists, they just think he was a famous Jewish teacher who, taught about Bible stories and stuff like that, but they don't see him as a deity or a god. So then persecution really ramped up against the Jewish people during the Crusades because that was a big Christian movement of, I'm not very good at the Crusades, but of a war. And so that's when persecution went up. What happened to the Jews during the Crusades was they were murdered or forced to convert in order to have their lives spared. So then we move along to the 1700s in Europe. This is where we see a shift of Jews not just being a religion, but also being a race. So there were some anti-Semitic scientists, so people who were against Jews that tried to prove that Jews were racially inferior. And this is what Hitler believed. So Hitler wasn't against Jews as a religion, he was against Jews as a race. He did not believe in religion as well, so he was against religion, but he saw Jews as a race. So he persecuted Jews who didn't practice Judaism, which is what it's called. He just, anybody who was racially a Jew or considered a Jew from heritage is who he persecuted. What his goal, and I just said this too, he wanted to eliminate the Jewish race, and so it didn't matter if they were religious or not. They could be Christian and, a descendant of Jews, but that didn't matter to him. So what Hitler's plan was, and I'm just going to kind of get into this a little bit before we go to how it began or how he got power, was he wanted to create what he called a master race, or like a white, blonde-haired, blue eyes race, which he was not blonde or blue-eyed, but he called it Aryan. His goal was to murder all the Jews in the world, not just in Germany and Europe. Obviously, he focused originally in Germany and Europe, but then wanted to move on to the whole world. He did not just target Jewish people, he did target others, such as Gypsies or Romani. So they would be the Bohemia kind of descendants, so Czechoslovakia, that area. Communists. So Hitler's party ideologies is fascism, can't talk, which is, like I said before in the World Leaders PowerPoint, it's opposite spectrum of communists. So they were very against each other in political ideologies. He was against homosexuals and anybody who has committed political crimes or crimes against him. He promoted the idea of Volksmannschaft. I had this right before. Volksmannschaft. I believe that's how it's pronounced. Basically, it's a people's community, but it's his people having this idyllic community. Where we kind of pick up as far as when Hitler starts to gain momentum in his, becoming a leader, we have to go back to why Germany was able to be taken over by him. So Germany after World War I, they were very, susceptible to having somebody who was very charismatic and, talked a good talk as far as taking over. So after World War I, they were very vulnerable. Remember, they were blamed for the war. They had many things taken away. The economy was bad because of the Versailles Treaty. If you remember, they had a ton of debts to pay from the Treaty of Versailles. So they had to pay huge war reparations to US, France, and Britain. They lost a bunch of their land. So if you see in this area, the black is what they lost. So here's the Rhineland area. And then this area over by Poland, or that is Poland really. And then they couldn't have a standing military and army. Hitler was part of the German army during World War I. He saw that as really the only place he belonged, and having that taken away from him was very upsetting, and he put a lot of blame on others for that. Another thing that happened in the 30s was the Great Depression, which started in the US but did affect other countries. Like I had said in the World Leaders video, that it affected Italy as well, but it very much impacted Germany. After World War I, they created what's called the Weimar Republic. So this was the government that was in charge after World War I and until the Nazi Party came to be. So they created what's called the National Assembly, which is like Congress today, if you think about it. And they elected a leader, Friedrich Ebert, and they also created a constitution. So it's pretty similar to our country. What they decided that there was going to be a president and a chancellor. So think of him kind of as like a speaker of the House, like the leader of Congress, and then a parliament, which would be like Congress. They also created an Article 48, which suspended civil rights in an emergency, and this we'll see happen later, but it's important to note now that they did have this in their constitution. And Germans were given rights just like in our Bill of Rights. They were given, the civil rights, civil liberties, freedoms, just like our country. Unfortunately, where FDR took over from Hoover and, helped with the Great Depression and get us out of the Great Depression, or start to get out. It was really World War II that got us out of the Great Depression, but the government thought that by printing more money, this would help. Unfortunately, it made money in Germany worthless. So you can see this woman wearing a dress of paper money. These kids are putting blocks of money together and stacking them up like toys. Because of this, cost of living rose because the money was worth less and people lost everything. So it's going to make them very, upset, angry with their country and government for letting them down. What they did then was create what's called the Dawes Plan. So Germany elected a new chancellor, Gustav Stresemann, and they created a new currency. So they said, we're done with the currency that we have. It's worthless now. We're just going to make a new one. What the Dawes Plan was that they gave Germany more reasonable reparation payments. So let's say you take a loan out on a car and you lose your job, and maybe you get a new lower paying job. You're going to go to your company or go to the bank that has the loan out and say, hey, I lost my job. Would you be able to, change the repayments so that I'm able to pay a little bit lower just so I can stay on my feet or get back on my feet? So here's what happened. And this really worked out for the U.S. The U.S. loans Germany money to pay back reparations. Germany pays back the Allies with a lower rate. And the Allies pay back the U.S. with the money loaned from Germany. So they had loans out as well. So the nations are trading. U.S. is loaning money and getting it back through the loans that they paid out. So really, they're coming out strong with, we're paying this money to Germany. Germany's paying England back. England's paying us back. So this made the Weimar Republic more stable and repaired relationships with other countries for Germany. So things start going good. But unfortunately, the Great Depression and the Treaty of Versailles and losing World War I, it starts the rise of the Nazi Party before the 30s. So Adolf Hitler, fresh out of the German army, is he doesn't have a family. He doesn't really belong. He's going to look for somewhere to go, and he finds this German Workers' Party in 1919. They were against the Treaty of Versailles, they were against the Jews, and they were for German nationalism, which is Germans are the best. He was born in Germany, I believe, and then moved to Austria, or was born in Austria. But he lived in Austria. He went to school in Austria. He failed out of art school. But overall, he was very pro-German. He didn't like Austria. So that's why originally he was drafted to the Austrian military, but he jumped ship and bailed to go to German army. What Hitler did was he really started rising among the ranks in the German Workers' Party because he became a speaker for the German Workers' Party. So before radio and TV and social media, if you wanted to get the word out, you really had to go speak and talk about things and talk about what your beliefs are. And so he became a speaker for the German Workers' Party, and he was very charismatic about what he talked about. So he was able to get a lot of new members to join based on what he was saying. 2 years later, he ended up being the leader of the NSDAP, which is also called the Nazi Party. This kind of morphed into it. So here is the, I believe this is the card, I think, for the German Workers' Party. No, it is for the DAP. So then we're going to get to the first time Hitler really challenges the government on a larger scale, which is called the Beer Hall Putsch. So Hitler, as he moves into his own party I guess it would be a party, the NSDAP or the Nazi Party, he starts voicing the blame for all the problems in Germany on the communists, the Marxists, which are Karl Marx's who created communism, and Jewish people for all the problems in Germany, which when you're looking for somebody to blame, and this person is giving you, hey, these are the people we blame, like it's easy to kind of like, oh, this guy's making sense. But in 1923, he tried to overthrow the government, the Weimar Republic, in a beer hall of places in Munich, Germany. And he was hoping what he was doing would trigger a larger movement. He thought by trying to overthrow a government in this small demonstration would trigger a larger movement that would go over all Germany to overthrow the government, which, as I'm saying this, it's a lot of parallels to the riots in the Capitol. He was arrested for treason after the beer hall putsch, and he spent about a year in jail. So he did not get away with his trying to overthrow the government. This is where he wrote his book called Mein Kampf, which is translated to My Struggle, which is right here. So he wrote that in jail. And then this is going to be the last one we go over. So Hitler was arrested, or when he was arrested, they banned the Nazi Party. So they disbanded the Nazi Party because they saw them as, treasonous and trying to overthrow the government. After Hitler was released, so he was arrested in 23, got out in 24, which I believe he got out early. I can't remember off the top of my head why. And then he was able to convince the government in 1925 that they were not a threat and he was no longer going to try to overthrow the government. By 1929, so at the dawn of the Great Depression, the Nazi Party had 130,000 members. Up until then, I would say their rhetoric and what they talked about wasn't, I wouldn't controversial, but it wasn't to the degree of what we see Hitler now. He really doesn't start going after the Jews and like the persecution of the Jews until he gains power. That was kind of like in the back burner. He was just trying to get people to get to his side and understand his viewpoints as a fascist and against communism. So we are going to stop here for today, and we'll pick up on this tomorrow.